Hey everyone, welcome back to another edition of Communicating Through Form. Today I will be giving lecture 7. We have this one, we have 7, 8, 9, lectures 7, 8, and 9 to go. Welcome to our third and final curtailed unit for the course. We'll just be doing 3 short workshops for this one, and I'll be recording 3 lectures and giving you 3 short tasks. You'll have until December 15th to complete all of them. And this unit will be devoting our time to some very basic fundamentals of photography. So I want to start with a quote about the history of photography because I think it's a useful rumination on the assumed value of capturing images. A trajectory, one of ever-increasing realism and faithfulness in most, if not all, art forms, faltered in the 19th and 20th centuries with the invention and popularization of the camera, photography, and filmmaking. If cameras can easily capture a faithful image of the world, what are the rest of the arts good for? What is art if faithful reproduction can be done with technology? Is photography faithful? Since the advent of photography, people have taken liberties and altered images at will. This is an example of spirit photography of the 19th century. Photographers would use analog means to Photoshop in ghosts and apparitions of loved ones who had died. Photography has evolved and its social function has evolved too. We're now in the era of what Nathan Jurgensen calls the social photo. The way meaning is carried through image has changed drastically in recent years. To the degree that it's ephemeral, the social photo does the opposite. It interrupts the traditional photographic mode of fixing the present as impending history, positioning instead a captured moment that is indifferent to such recordings. But that's not going to matter too much for this context. Here's why we're going to learn some basic facility with photography and why it matters to you. In other words, why photography matters for industrial design. Firstly, for presentation. As you develop products and artifacts, it will be crucial to photograph them in such a way as to ensure their essential character is revealed. Through photography, you can take an idea, sketchily demonstrate it in a prototype, and articulate and perfect it. How you photograph your work will determine how people will see your work. Photography matters for context. This is an image of a titanium camping bong made by Dangle Supply. It makes a whole lot more sense nestled in a mountain stream than in a cold white studio background. Learning how to compose an image will help contextualize the work that you make. Photography helps to deepen the narrative surrounding your work. This is a part of the Digester series by Anthony Dunn and Fiona Raby. They constructed a series of external digesters for a future with limited food supplies. The photograph you just saw was included in an exhibition of the artifacts themselves to provide a deeper narrative context that these speculative pieces were designed around, namely the realities of climate change and environmental degradation. The digesters are meant to augment humans' ability to extract nutrients from the land in a post-apocalyptic future. Lastly, photography is a crucial part of the task of documentation. As makers, accurately documenting your process will be necessary for yourselves and those around you. Remember, it's crucial to remembering how you construct things, to showing peers how to do something, to reminding yourself of the effort and problem solving that it took to develop your ideas, and for onboarding other parties into your creation and production process. All of these require a high level of detail, and a picture is worth 1,000 words. In sum, how you shoot your work will be integral to how you communicate what you do and what you make throughout your time at OCAD and beyond. In today's lecture, I want to introduce some fundamental details to keep in mind as you shoot and assess images. These are some basic concepts to the practice, and I'll start with a short history. At their most fundamental, cameras are devices that are sensitive to light and can record that light in some form. Cameras are functionally very similar to our eyes in that they focus light information through an opening and direct it towards some sort of light-sensitive receptor. That receptor can be rods and cones. It can be a film coated in an emulsion, or it can even be, as most of them are today, photosensors, digital photosensors. Often considered the starting point of photography, the camera obscura refers to large boxes that only allowed light in through a small lensless opening, otherwise known as apertures. While these didn't permanently record images, they enabled the study of light and perspective, and artists often used tracing paper to project light directly onto a drawing surface or for reference. As the study of optics progressed, it was discovered that lenses could be used to distort and focus light, which allowed inventors to reduce the size of photographic devices significantly. Further, by using substances that were known to darken when exposed to light and that could be sealed by a chemical treatment, it became viable to record images permanently in grayscale. Initially, these images took hours to record, but as new light-sensitive substances were discovered, the time was reduced to seconds. This is largely considered to be the first photograph ever taken. It's called View from the Window at Le Gras by Joseph Nicephore Niepce in 1827. With shorter exposure times came the invention of mechanical shutters to open and close the camera. This opened up the possibility of photographing objects in motion, while also allowing photographers to use magnesium flash to manipulate basic lighting. As photography became more easily accessible, affordable, and popular, technology began to rapidly advance to support it. Over time, refinements were made to image quality, ease of use, and the degree of control that a photographer had over an image. With this transition, photography became an extension of journalism. This photograph by Jacob Riis is titled Bandit's Roost. It's an image of an alley in Lower Manhattan from his book about poverty and crime in New York called How the Other Half Lives. New camera technology allowed Riis to move his studio out into the world, capturing things that couldn't have been captured before. The beginning of the 20th century saw the development of color photography and motion picture film, as well as advancements in the quality of lenses, apertures, and built-in flash systems to control light. The invention of the single lens reflex system, which used a series of mirrors to create a viewfinder, allowed photographers to preview an image before a photo was captured. Excuse me, I'm going to see if I can turn that off. Let's do that really quick. So be it, we'll do it later. Which used a series of mirrors to create a viewfinder, allowed photographers to preview an image before a photo was captured. For example, of street photography from New York in the 20th century. This was shot by Diane Arbus. With the advent of digital photography in the late 20th century, the accessibility and level of control afforded by camera technology continues to improve. Whether through photos or motion pictures, we're constantly engaging with content recorded by cameras. Following the release of the first phone camera in 2000, photography has become increasingly ubiquitous. While phones lack any mechanical components or conventional cameras, software applications can mimic some of the same functions with varying degrees of success. But we'll be getting into that in the next video. Today, a majority of images that are taken are intended for machine consumption as opposed to human consumption. There are many different cameras and camera accessories available to you, and each has its own subtle variations that affect how it takes photos. Rather than provide an exhaustive list of different sorts of equipment, what we're going to do today is cover some of the main terminology that is applicable to most modern image capture. And I want you to keep these terms in mind because these are the sort of foundational terms that will inform your first workshop. First off, let's talk about the blanket concept of exposure. Cameras require light to work. Not enough light and we won't see the subject, while too much light will blow out an image. While a camera can't control how light or dark a scene or subject is, it can be adjusted to pick up more or less of the light that exists. A camera's exposure refers to how much light the device records and is a function of three factors: its aperture, its shutter speed, and its ISO, sometimes referred to as the exposure triangle. This is an image by Trevor Paglen. He uses state-of-the-art telephoto camera equipment to shoot secret government facilities in order to give them a sense of public visibility. These are shot from places where he was as near as he could to these institutions. The resulting images are spooky distance images, often blown out due to how much he has to adjust to compensate for exposure. Exposure is as I said, exposure is largely determined by three variables. Firstly, aperture. Light enters a camera through an opening or an aperture, which can be made wider or narrower to allow more or less light in. Aperture is measured using the f-stop scale, ranging from f1.4, often ranging from f1.4, which is very large, to f22, which is very small. So that means that the higher numbers mean less light. The side effect of adjusting aperture is that wider apertures will reduce your depth of field, meaning that a smaller range of your image will be in focus. It's not always desirable to have an entire scene in focus, or even any of it. In some cases, aperture is a great way to increase exposure, since the side effect can actually help you. Take, for example, this image by Jessica Lerman from her series Revolution of a Black Lives Matter protest in New York City. What you'll notice is that the foreground is way less focused than the background, thus creating a very dynamic frame. The next variable affecting exposure is shutter speed. While the aperture determines the quantity of light that enters the camera, the shutter speed determines how long the light is allowed to enter. Shutter speed is measured in fractions of a second: 1/125th, 1/3000th, 1/2. Longer shutter speeds mean more exposure, but the longer it takes for a camera to take a photo, the more it will pick up on movement that causes visual blurring. The faster a subject is moving, the shorter the shutter speed needs to be if the goal is a crisp photograph. This is an image of some towers in the night sky. Those lines that you see in the sky are actual stars. And because the shutter speed is so long, you can actually see the rotation of the Earth. The last variable affecting exposure is ISO. ISO refers to the light sensitivity of your camera's photosensors or of the film that you're using for analog cameras. With lower ISOs being less sensitive to light, common ISOs range from 50 to 800 through digital cameras can go far higher and adjust on the fly. The side effect of higher ISO values is that it increases image and noise grain, even if the subject is in focus. Unlike aperture and shutter speed, we only want to increase ISO when we have to, as the reduction in image quality doesn't have much application. Let's talk for a minute about lenses. Two common ends of the lens spectrum outside of the norm are referred to as wide angle and telephoto lenses. They're primarily distinguished by their relative depth of field and how they render distance. Wide angle lenses capture images with a greater depth of field, where more of the scene is in focus, and can also make things that are far away appear closer, i.e. they compress distance. Whereas telephoto lenses have a narrower depth of field and objects in the background are made smaller so as to appear further away, so they expand distance. The image you see at the top is a mountain range and lake that was shot on a wide angle lens. What you see is there's a lot of information available to you. The image on the bottom was taken with a telephoto lens. Exposure and the variables associated with it are among the most important when learning photography, though they can be somewhat limited by the camera's hardware, especially on phones. That slide is slightly out of place. One last detail to discuss today is light source. The size and position of your light source will greatly affect the outcomes of your image. A general rule of thumb is the larger the light source relative to your subject, the softer the light. And that's why people generally photograph better on overcast days. Shadows are much less harsh in soft light. Here we see two images. On the left is a man shot with hard light. You'll notice that the shadow is very pronounced, especially on his face and in the background. Then on the right, you see the same man shot using soft light, and you'll notice that the shadows are much softer as a result. The second image was most likely shot using a light source that diffuses light over a large area, otherwise known as a softbox. Thanks for waiting, people. Let's come back to it. Here we are. In this photograph by Nikki McLaren, these two subjects are shot on a white background with a large light source, most likely a softbox. As you see, a light source that diffuses light over a large area. In this image, you can see how shadows are very subtly cast over the faces of her subjects. Compare that to this photo by Fabio Bucciarelli. You can see how sharp the lines of these shadows are. The light source here is the sun. It's bright and it's far away. It creates immensely hard light in circumstances like this. In the next lecture, I'll be showing you how to achieve some of the basic effects based on materials you might have lying around your house. But for your first workshop, I want you to go through your own photos and find images, your own photos and photos online, which demonstrate some of the ideas that we outlined today. In the next workshop, we'll be devoted to maximizing your camera's potential. For example, this production shot from the film Tangerine, which was shot entirely on iPhone. And lastly, we're going to look at refining things on Photoshop to fix things in post. I'll see you soon.